It occurs during periods of high stress from a lack of blood flow to the eyes. If you're lucky, you only get it in one eye. I get it in both. It can last anywhere from a few seconds to a few minutes. My life was the definition of high stress, and by doctor's orders, I needed to get out and relieve myself. That's how I met Roger and Ron. I'd always wanted to get on a boat, ever since I was a kid. When life takes its twists and turns, it sometimes leads you down an interesting path. Roger was the owner of the boat, Anna Marie, and Ron was a friend he had known a long time. They were tuna fishermen, and through what seemed like fate, I ran into them. Next thing I knew, I was headed out on a week-long trip to tuna fish on an adventure I would never forget. 3 days into our journey, and without much luck the past few hours, Roger got up out of the captain's chair and walked to the stern where Ron and I sat watching the lines, waiting for tuna. "We might be heading back here soon," Roger said, cigarette dangling from his lips. "Why? I was just down in the freezer earlier today and we still got quite a lot of room for fish," I said. "Weather. Getting bad, I'm afraid. Look over there, off port side." "Man, that still looks ways off. Sure it isn't going to go around us? The clouds don't even look big at all. Let me look at the radar," Ron said, pushing past Roger and I and heading for the cabin. "Stubborn as a mule," Roger said, flicking his cigarette. "I always wanted to come out here and stay as long as it takes to fill her up, but sometimes you gotta know when to quit." Roger turned and headed back into the cabin, and a small heated exchange began. After a few minutes, Ron came storming out. "He's right, unfortunately. But hell, either way, we're going to get caught in a bit of bad weather. We're going to start heading back now, but tonight might get a little rocky. Come on, help me reel the lines in." After we put everything away and started heading back, you could look out and see the dark clouds getting closer and closer. I was a little terrified, and I know it showed. Roger kept assuring me that everything was going to be fine, and he had weathered much more ghastly storms in the Anna Marie than the small one that was headed our way. When night hit, it got dark, real dark. The clouds covered the moon, and not an inkling of light passed through. We sat sipping coffee to keep us alert and listened to the rain increase in temperament. "Ain't no thing, just a little rain. Looking at the radar, seems it won't be going on too long," Roger said, taking a swig of coffee. Rain started pelting harder and harder, as if the gods themselves decided to prove just how incorrect Roger was. The wind started howling, and as I looked out the small cabin window, I saw something which made me rub my eyes. "What is that? On the window?" I set my coffee down and looked out towards the cabin door. On the oval-shaped glass were raindrops, except these raindrops were dark, a shade of red bordering on black, and they appeared to be sticky. Rain falls and slides down surfaces, leaves a trail behind its origin, and plummets towards the floor. These raindrops splattered against the glass with hostility, smacking into one another and coating the entire glass with a dark hue, like looking through a pair of darkened sunglasses. Roger shot up from his seat, spilling coffee over the table and onto the cream-coloured floor. "Get away from there, now!" he shouted. Ron bolted up, and with more haste than I thought possible of him, turned off the lights in the cabin so we're in total darkness. "Get down, stay quiet, and don't make a noise. If you don't listen to me, you will absolutely die," Ron shouted in horror. At that moment, I heard Roger flail onto the nearby bed as Ron flopped to the floor. In the darkness, I couldn't see anything, but Ron and Roger had no reason to lie to me. Seeing their faces meant that whether it was true or not, the words they expressed they wholeheartedly believed. I flung myself onto the bed on the opposite side of the room of Roger, nearly tripping over Ron's feet as he lay between us on the floor. All was quiet. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I dared not speak. As my mind started to wonder whether this may be some sort of trick, the boat started to creak. Boats always creak and sway and moan their song as they battle the waves of the sea. But this wasn't one of those songs. This was a song of fear. I could feel myself slowly sliding towards the cabin door as if the boat was tipping. The boat was rocking against the waves, but something was anchoring us down towards the bottom. I looked over and in the darkness could see the outline of Ron's figure flat on his back, gripping the legs of the bolted table to prevent himself from sliding. Then, just as quickly as it had came, we levelled out. The front of the boat slammed against the water, nearly bouncing me from the very surface I lay on. The dishes flew from the table and out of their cabinets. They tinged and dinged and shattered into a million pieces on the floor and countertops. I heard the crunching and sailing of paper through the air, the small whispered gasps of surprise from my crewmates, and the boat sang its songs as it creaked and groaned and gasped for air. I dared raise my head from my pillow and glance towards the door. Through the darkened hue of the glass, I saw the figure. It was too dark to see it fully, but it was definitely not human. That's when it happened. Everything went black. Amaurosis fugax. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry out and beg to God above to spare me from whatever horror or trick was being played on me. But I couldn't. Fear gripped me like an iron fist as I plopped my head against the cool pillow. As my pulse beat faster and faster, I could feel my blood vessels swell and contract. I could feel eyes burn as tears started to well up in the corners of my eyes. The door, heavy as it was, flew open with tremendous force as it slammed against the interior of the cabin. It sounded as if whatever had opened it had nearly removed it from its hinges and jamb. As pieces of glass rained down to the floor with a series of thuds and cracks, I winced. A sharp, ear-piercing pain filled my ears as a high-pitched squeal bellowed from the doorway. I shut my eyes as hard as I could until I felt they were going to recede into the back of my head. Either bits of spittle or rain from the outside flaked onto my face in a light mist. I wanted so badly to wipe my face and cover my ears, but I couldn't. I heard a loud smack of footsteps on the floor. Whatever was on the boat was heavy. They slapped against the floor. The sound reminded me of a duck walking on pavement, webbed feet. It took a few steps, and in a beast-like fashion, it sniffed and snorted like a beagle on the trail of a squirrel. I could hear the creature coming closer. The rain was coming in through the doorway now, as the creature was no longer blocking the entrance. Globs of rain came down against my nose and cheeks, and I could feel their stickiness. It felt like syrup being dumped on my face, and it smelt faintly of acid. It did not burn, and it did not sting, but its tingling sensation was uncomfortable. My eyes continued to burn, and I could feel the tears streaming down my face. The only thing I could think about was that I hoped this was a bad dream. I hoped to wake up any moment from this horror and laugh as I caught fish with Ron and told Roger of my nightmare as he smoked a cigarette. The creature's breath grew louder, and I could feel its presence shifting into my direction. I could feel its intimidating shadow tower over my body as I lay there, trying not to breathe or wail in terror. I felt my palms coat with sweat as the creature's body continued to get closer. It felt only inches from my face. I could feel its hot breath on my forehead as it sucked in air, sniffing the room around me. Its throat made a low grumble as I heard it snarl its teeth. The teeth chattered together with small vibrations, and I felt a massive drop of liquid drop onto my cheek. It burned and ached, and I could feel the skin eroding away where the glob had landed. Then, a loud clang came from the other side of the room. It sounded as if a dangling piece of silverware had finally decided to crash to the ground as the boat sang its song. I felt the creature raise its head and looked towards the sound. As the shadow of death raised from my body, I opened my eyes. It was still total darkness, and I was still blind. As the wind whirled outside and pelted against the sides of the boat, it almost masked the sharp jab of pain I heard utter from the mouth of Ron beside me. The creature, in its haste to investigate the strange noise, had stepped on Ron. Ron let out the smallest noise, but like a shark with blood in its nose, the creature sounded excited. It chattered its teeth and let out another blood-curdling shriek that seemed to echo inside the small cabin. As the boat creaked and groaned against the weight of the mighty ocean, I heard the creature's jaws chomp as it clanged its teeth against each other. I could hear the blood gurgling from Ron's mouth as the creature laid into him as he tried to curse the gods above for his misfortune. I could hear the popping of bones and the shredding of flesh as the creature filled its belly. There was nothing I could do but try not to picture the man beside me being torn apart by the jaws of death. Bits of blood and flesh could be heard speckling the interior of the cabin as Ron's gurgling began to stop. I tried not to weep, and I could feel the bile rising up my esophagus and tried not to vomit. I put my hand over my mouth and squeezed as hard as I could, and feared I would be next should I make a sound. For the next few moments, all was quiet except the grating of the boat and the creature's tongue mopping the blood-soaked floor for any remnants. It was now, of all times, I started to pee. The anticipation of what the creature would do next and the thought of what it was capable of soaked my jeans. As the air filled with ammonia and fear, I thought for sure the creature would use its sense of smell to detect my presence. To my surprise, I started to hear its webbed feet slap the floor as it began to walk towards the door. As soon as it came, it was gone. I lay quiet, starting to smell the stink of blood and listen to the noises, daring not to breathe. The song of the boat began to wither, and the seas began to calm. The gooey rain began to lessen, and I dared to look up again. My vision returned, and peering out of the broken doorway, I could finally see. I saw the bloody-soaked footprints of the beast leading towards the bow, glistening off the moonlight of the quickly clearing sky. The stars were beginning to shine, and as I looked over towards Ron, laying in pieces of shattered flesh, I began to weep.